Greetings, parasite ecologists. We have talked about the vertebrate gut as a habitat, and now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what cestodes are doing with the energy they pick up while living in that habitat. Tapeworms have a reputation. Maybe you've heard that you can lose weight by eating tapeworm eggs. Snake oil salespeople have been taking advantage of this misunderstanding for a long time. The idea is that you buy some expensive tapeworm eggs, eat them, and you wind up with an adult tapeworm living in your intestine, which absorbs all of your calories, keeping you in fair form, as this ad puts it. Well, in this lecture, we're going to investigate whether this is a good weight loss strategy. Let's begin by recalling some definitions from one of our early videos. We defined virulence as the ability of a parasite to cause harm to its host. Something that is avirulent is not virulent. We defined pathology as the harmful effects of a parasite on its host. And finally, you already know that fitness is the reproductive success of an individual, where more or better progeny means higher fitness. Remember that in Hymenalepis diminuta, we have been talking a bunch about the extreme efficiency of the rat tapeworm in converting food into tapeworm biomass, compared to the rat, which is comparatively poor at doing the same thing. Now, let's look at how much efficiency the rat loses when it gets infected. Let's calculate the gross productive efficiency of the rat in the presence and absence of the worm, where the GPE is the mass of tissue added divided by the mass of food consumed times 100. You can think of this as miles traveled per gallon of food. Miles per gallon is a common metric that we understand to mean how far you can go for the amount that you put in. The same thing applies to gross productive efficiency. How much mass of tissue do you add for the mass of food that you put in? Are you an electric sedan that requires very little gas to go a mile? Or are you a 30-year-old SUV? Okay, so let's take a look at the rat's gross productive efficiency on its own and when it has some tapeworms. An uninfected rat has a gross productive efficiency of 4.04%. If 100 grams of food go into the rat, it can add 4.04 grams of rat tissue. For an infected rat, gross productive efficiency is 4.00%. If 100 grams of food go in, the rat can add 4 grams of rat tissue. Not much of a difference. There is a relatively small decrease in GPE when a rat gets parasitized, making the tapeworm essentially avirulent. The tapeworm makes very little difference to the overall energy budget of this rat. The rat still takes in pretty much the same amount of food and still puts out pretty much the same amount of rat biomass and rat babies. What's happening here is that the vertebrate host is compensating for infection by increasing the rate of digestion, and we see little or no pathology from having a tapeworm in the definitive host. And this is generally true for all adult tapeworms on a per-worm basis. Adult tapeworms take very, very little energy from their hosts. Unfortunately, this means we can't all buy tapeworms through the mail to lose weight. The exception to this is if you have a large number of adult tapeworms. But having a belly full of tapeworms, that comes with other potential problems like bowel perforations and intestinal blockages, which are bad. Therefore, to lose weight using tapeworms, you would need to be infected with so many tapeworms that it would be very dangerous. And that's why eating tapeworms for weight loss is a snake oil cure, one that does not work. So for a definitive host, the cost of infection is pretty low. Is the same true if we look at the intermediate hosts of tapeworms? Let's answer with a photo. This is a 3-spined stickleback, and it is the intermediate host of Schistocephalus solidus, a tapeworm parasite. Here's what it would look like if I euthanized that poor little stickleback and dissected out the tapeworm larvae living in its body cavity. All of these tapeworm babies came from this one tiny host. This is Schistocephalus solidus, an aquatic freshwater species of tapeworm parasite that uses birds as its definitive host. Birds poop out an oncosphere or an egg that goes on to infect the first intermediate host crustacean, like this copepod. That first intermediate host crustacean is eaten by a second intermediate host, in this case, the stickleback, and that stickleback is itself eaten by the bird, completing the parasite's life cycle. The stickleback is host to the larval stage of the parasite, which is a pleurocercoid, a larva that lives in the body cavity of the stickleback host. In that stickleback host, the energetics of Schistocephalus solidus are really, really different than they would be for the adult stage of the parasite living in the definitive host. Let's look first at an uninfected fish. Let's say it's consuming a bunch of food. About 90% of that is absorbed by the uninfected fish's gut, and about 10% is egested or defecated out. Of the food consumed, 90% is used by the uninfected fish for maintenance, growth, reproduction, whatever. However, in the infected fish, only 50% of the food consumed is actually available for the host, and 40% is used by Schistocephalus solidus. That's a really big difference from what we saw for the energetics of Hymenolipus diminuta in its rat host, a really different outcome, depending on whether we're looking at the larval form of a parasite or the adult form of a parasite. This larva is taking a tremendous amount of energy from its host. These larval tapeworms are really ruthless about taxing host resources. About 40% of available nutrients go to the larval worm, and the worms use that resource to grow really rapidly. And as a result, these worms parasitically castrate their fish host. They don't actually eat the host's gonads, but they suck away so much energy from the host that the host has literally nothing left to give its own gonads. And as a result, it is parasitically castrated. The fitness consequences of Schistocephalus solidus parasitism are really severe. Here you can see a histological section of a stickleback that was basically cut into really thin sections. You can see the outline of the fish's eye, its mouth, its back. You can see some of its musculature in the upper left-hand corner of the slide. And then all those wormy structures, those are larval tapeworms. You can see that they're occupying a huge volume of the body cavity. Because they're taking up so much of the body cavity, the sticklebacks that are infected are actually pretty ponderous and big. They have a really hard time escaping from bird predation. They wind up much more likely to be caught in the beak of a bird, leading to parasite-induced trophic transmission, just like we saw with the trematodes. Why the difference? Well, the larval tapeworm wants its host to die in the beak of a bird, so it can siphon off as much nutrition as it wants. It is invested in its host's death. The adult parasite needs its host to keep living, so it's much more conservative about how much energy it steals. In summary, adult tapeworms are pretty energetically efficient. The size of the worm is small relative to the size of the host, and the energetic costs and pathology to that definitive host are low. In contrast, larval tapeworms can grow to be quite large relative to their host, and they use host resources really rapidly. The energetics of that relationship can be really, really costly for the intermediate host and can include parasitic castration. So if you had to choose to be infected by a tapeworm, I would recommend that you choose to be infected by an adult rather than a larval tapeworm. Just kidding. Don't get infected by any tapeworms, but do remember that larval tapeworms are way more pathogenic than adults. I'll see you in the next video.